So there is news flying across the social media apps talking about Trump potentially deploying the 82nd Airborne to the border, and of course, the average layperson who doesn't understand the law with regard to the federal military and the Posse Comitatus Act are freaking out. Now, our opinions on deploying troops to the US-Mexico border are somewhat irrelevant here. So whether you support sending troops or not, the law is pretty straightforward about what Trump is doing. So before I get into that law, I want to explain that Trump has done this before. Back in 2018, he deployed federal troops to the border, and in fact, Biden did the same thing in 2023. Now, when I say federal troops, I mean troops that are not a part of the National Guard, who generally fall under the command of the governor. I'm talking about the active duty federal troops who are under the direction of the president as commander-in-chief. Now, the president also has additional powers to federalize the National Guard troops, but that is not the case here, and that is a whole separate thing, a separate video. So up front, it is incorrect to state that what Trump is doing is a violation of the Posse Comitatus Act. For those of you that don't know, Posse Comitatus is an act that generally prohibits the use of U.S. military for law enforcement activities within the United States, such as arrests, searches, or seizures, unless they are specifically authorized by law. And this is where the Defense Support of Civil Authorities, or DSCA law, comes in. This law provides a framework for how the military can legally support civilian authorities in non-law enforcement roles while adhering to the Posse Comitatus restrictions. The key word here is support. Now, the deployments of federal troops to the U.S.-Mexico border under both Trump and Biden were conducted within the framework of DSCA, adhering to the constraints imposed by the Posse Comitatus Act. For the Trump administration in 2018, they had Operation Faithful Patriot. Now, this operation deployed active duty troops to the border to support U.S. Customs and Border Protection. The military's role was limited to logistical and infrastructural support, and they did things like installing barriers and providing transportation, thus ensuring that they complied with the Posse Comitatus Act by avoiding direct law enforcement activities. In May of 2023, the Biden administration deployed 1,500 active duty troops to the border. These personnel were assigned to support roles, including administrative tasks, transportation, and surveillance. And in this case, they explicitly avoided direct law enforcement duties as well to remain within the Posse Comitatus Act limitations. Now, cut to today. The Trump administration is utilizing military aircraft, specifically U.S. Air Force C-17s, to deport detained migrants. While the use of military assets in deportation operations is unprecedented, to say the least, the administration is maintaining that the military's role is supportive. They are focusing on transportation rather than direct enforcement actions, thereby aligning with Posse Comitatus Act restrictions, according to them. Now, this may be challenged in court, as critics argue that such deployments risk blurring the lines between military support and direct law enforcement, potentially violating the Posse Comitatus Act. But to date, the U.S. Supreme Court has not directly ruled on a case solely concerning a president's violation of the Posse Comitatus Act. In State v. Danko 1976, the Kansas Supreme Court ruled on a case encompassing military involvement in civilian law enforcement searches, finding a technical Posse Comitatus violation. In United States v. Dreyer 2014, the Ninth Circuit Court found that a Navy Criminal Investigation Service agent's broad surveillance violated the Posse Comitatus Act by improperly engaging in civilian law enforcement. The case actually reinforced the judiciary's role in limiting military involvement in civilian affairs. The debate over deploying federal troops to the border often sparks heated opinions, but the fact remains clear. Such actions, when conducted under the framework of Defense Support of Civil Authorities, adhere to the legal constraints of the Posse Comitatus Act. Both Trump and Biden have used active duty troops in supportive non-law enforcement roles without crossing legal boundaries. While critics may challenge these deployments in court, the law, as it stands, permits these actions as long as the military's role remains limited to logistical and administrative support. We'll see where it goes from here, and if there will be potential court cases in the near future with regard to how Trump deploys his troops and how they act along the U.S.-Mexico border. But for now, it seems that he is within his rights to do so.